Good morning, everyone. This is Barbara again. I welcome you to Neuropsychology of the School Ecosystem, André Hedlund's lecture. This will be held fully in English, okay? If you need subtitles, it will be showing after the lecture ends on the recorded video. About the certificates, I'll ask you to download it through a computer through the link that will be available on the video's description as well. You accept the terms of WeTransfer, download it on PDF, open it on your web navigator, click over the purple field, erase your name, erase the text, and put on your name. Then save it, and you have it for the rest of your life. Just remember the link will be available for only 7 days. After that, it's not available anymore. All right? Enjoy your lecture.
Well, thank you very much, Barbara. I hope everybody can see me well and hear me. And I would love to hear from you in the chat box. I'm actually following YouTube here with my cell phone. So where are you coming from? I can see some people from Minas, from Belo Horizonte, from São Paulo. That's wonderful. And I hope you really, you are excited with this event, because I know there are many wonderful speakers, people that I know, people who are very competent and talking about very pertinent topics that will certainly help teachers out there. So my topic today is the neuropsychology of the school ecosystem, because I really want us to look at our work as educators and teachers from a perspective of somebody who's integrated into something bigger. It's not just about what we do in the classroom. It's not just about what our students do or the families or everybody who's involved, but it's about what the whole system does and what will be the effects of the pandemic maybe in the future, because we really have no idea what's going to happen in a couple of months. We don't know what's going to happen in a couple of years in terms of mental health, for example. So I really hope that this lecture can at least have you reflect on those things, okay? Now, this is the agenda. So we're going to go through some of those topics that I chose. Innovation, technology, online teaching, does it work? Is it the best way we can reach our students? And then the growing concern that I had as an educator, as a bilingual program mentor for Edify, and which actually led me to write a couple of things for Edify's blog and also my blog. And then the theory that, just came to me while I was thinking about all of those things, because this is something I studied in my master's course. And then I realized that if we look at this theory, we might be able to better explain what we should be doing so that we can come up with a better solution. And that's all about neuropsychology, So that's why I brought my brain. You saw a video, and I think Barbara said something about me bringing my brain, that I was really excited about this talk. And here's my brain for all of you to see. And I think a lot of the things that happen to us, they have a psychological and a neurological origin that we cannot disregard. We really have to think about the long-term consequences of whatever is going on inside our brains and inside our minds, and what to do. So hopefully I will give you a couple of practical tips for you to apply, or at least to reflect on with your colleagues, with whoever it is who's there with you in the ecosystem. Now, I'd like to start with a reflection. So how do we create the new? And I really like to use this image because I think it says a lot about our educational system in the last 100 years or so, or even more, 110 years. So does anybody know who this guy on the left, the guy holding a cane and a cigar, who he is? He's a very famous guy. Any idea? If you want to use the chat box to interact, please feel free. Okay, so Sigmund Freud, right? The father of modern psychoanalysis, psychiatry, right? He was invited in 1909, if I'm not mistaken, by G. Stanley Hall, this very, charming gentleman in the middle, right there, who was the director of Clark University at the time in the United States, to talk about his research. his ideas, his somewhat crazy ideas for the time, right? And then, of course, he accepted the invitation. He traveled to the United States. He was accompanied by his disciple, we could say, Carl Jung, the guy on the right there. And then the picture on the top right hand side of the screen there shows what would have been a lecture of Freud. So I couldn't find an official picture portraying what happened, but this was part of a famous movie in the 50s, if I'm not mistaken, that discussed this episode. And what do you see there? What are some of the things that you can see? Well, I can see what we have basically seen for a very long time in educational settings all over the world, right? You have the beam of knowledge, the teacher, who is right there in the middle, actually in front of all of the students. You have a blackboard behind the teacher. You have everybody basically sitting across from the teacher. They're looking at the teacher. They're listening to the teacher, pretty much like what you're doing now. You're listening to me. I'm in front of you. I have my blackboard now is the projection, the slides that I have prepared. And then if you think about it, how much has changed then? Have we created anything new? And that brings me to that other picture you have there. You can see a woman behind a desk. There's a projection of something on the wall. You can see a lot of students sitting right in front of her, listening to her, looking at the slides, pretty much the same thing that Freud was doing nearly 100 years before. The only difference really is, there are actually a couple of differences, but one, which is a very positive difference, is that now you have a woman lecturing and you have women in the audience as students. You can see that you only had men listening to Freud back then. The other difference is now that she's doing basically the same, but she has new technological tools. She has a projector, for example, or maybe an interactive whiteboard, right? And for many, many years, especially I'd say in the last decade or so, or even 2 decades ago, we've been thinking about how to integrate new technologies into teaching, into the educational ecosystem or educational settings, because we wanted to create something new. But then looking at those two photos, Freud's lecturing, my Professor Joe lecturing. That's, by the way, my Professor Joe from the University of Bristol. What is the big difference then? Have we created the new? Have we done anything really innovative? So that's when we come to this idea of we are going to use technology, ed tech, to innovate. We're going to use something digital, something online, to make sure that our students can learn in a more effective way. They can have more positive learning outcomes or something like that. But then, if we're just going to use a projector and basically replicate the same old, what professors and lecturers and teachers have been doing for a century or more, are we really innovating? Does it matter if we have tech, new technology in the classroom? And then I wanted to know from you, what comes to your mind when you think of technology? What are some of the words that, are related to technology, the way you see it? So I would really like to know, to understand from your perspective, and you can use the chat box to write there some of the things that you think of. So let's see. So I see some people coming from Porto Alegre. The model is the same, but we've had some improvements, as I said, exactly. So possibilities, tools, yeah. And then somebody said the picture is misleading. Yes, I'm going to talk about that. Computer speed. So we have a bunch of interesting things that we can think of when we think of technology, right? But then I think technology, if we go to the etymology of the word technology, comes from the Greek, and it has to do with, a new way, a tool, a fashion, to do something. That's techne from Greek, right? And if you think about logy, that means the discourse or the speech or the study of something. So technology is kind of a way to do something, a tool. It doesn't have to be digital. It doesn't have to be online. So it doesn't necessarily connect with innovation in terms of using the latest digital tool or something like that. It could be anything else, because technology, the origin of technology is something, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be digital or online, so that we can do something new maybe, or we can do something old in a new way. That's the idea. And then if you think about what we went through last year, and we're still going through, I'd say most countries in the world nowadays, we had to learn very quickly how to use technology to teach online, right? So maybe some people probably thought this is the educational revolution that we needed, right? We're going to finally integrate digital technologies, online technologies into the school curriculum so that our students can learn more effectively, right? But is it true? Is teaching online better? Were we prepared to do that? So those are very important questions. We have to think that this is the option we have now, and we've had for almost a year now. It's also something that I would like to refer to as a reality check, because it shows us, at least the way I see it, that many schools were not prepared. I'd say most schools were really not prepared because of the lack of infrastructure or teacher training courses, maybe, about technology, which ed tech, technologies we can use, right? And then there is a gap. There's a huge gap between what we can deliver, what our students might expect us to deliver, what our students' families would want us to deliver in terms of technological advancements in the classroom, right? Yes, so Maria Alice just mentioned that I don't believe we were prepared, right? Exactly. And then somebody said something about digital literacy. Those are all great, reflections, right? And then, of course, teaching online can be better in many respects. It worked for some schools at some, I would say to some extent, it did work. That, for some educators, it was actually something that they were expecting for a very long time. And I watched the National Geographic webinar a couple of months ago by Alex Warren, and he mentioned, I think he did a great job summarizing why teaching online can be better, because you can personalize more, you can differentiate more, you can keep track of learning better, right? Because you have, artificial intelligence, you have learning management systems, you know how many minutes each student spent on whatever you assigned, because that's what the technology can do for us, right? They have immediate feedback because it's kind of automatic, right? They do something, they get their answers, then they can work on the things that they didn't get right. You also have better formative assessment because you kind of create a digital portfolio of the things that they're doing. It speaks our students' language, right? Because they were born into this era of technological advancements and everything. And if you think about it, it involves their family. Because now, especially for the very young learners, they need someone to turn on and turn off the computer, right? And they need someone to access the video conferencing tool you're using with them. So this is very important as well. If you want to watch this talk, you can scan the QR code, or you can just go to National Geographic Learning webinar series on their website, okay? But then, again, going back, so maybe this technological advancement or revolution was coming, and then it was kind of sped up because of the pandemic, and we're going to change things, and things are going to be better, and we're going to help our students with better learning outcomes. But is that the impression that you had? This is a very important question. So we have integrated more technology into the way we are teaching, right? Because we were forced to. We had to do it. We had to adapt. We had to make this transition. Was it better for our students? Was it better for schools in general? So is it part of this technological advancement or this technological revolution that we were expecting to see in schools? Yeah. Somebody mentioned that the QR code doesn't work. I can send you a link later, or you just go to webinars, National Geographic Learning webinars, and you'll find that one, okay? So is it working now? Have we brought this technological revolution we were expecting? What is your impression? Yeah? For some people, yes, I think it has become better. It works for me. It does. No. So a lot of, it does. I think it has become better again. Both. Okay, the codes are not working. So I promise I will send the links to you later. For some reason, they should be working. You see technological problems, right? Well, my impression, talking to the teachers that I mentor, especially because they have many students in the classroom, which might not be your situation, is that it can be a terrible challenge and it might not work as well as we had expected. And especially if you're working with very young learners and young learners. If you're working at regular schools where, you have, I don't know, maybe 15, 20, 25, 30 students, and they're 5-year-old students or 6-year-old students, it's very hard to do it because, maybe it was not made for them. It's challenging, as somebody mentioned there. And so the evidence that we have, and this is very kind of, I'd say funny or a paradox, is that even 10 years ago, so this is something I got from 2010, 10 years ago, they were discussing how online learning is going to revolutionize K-12. That's kindergarten to 12 in the United States, right? Benefiting students. And then, you can imagine people were sort of, wow, this is really going to change or transform education as we know it. So that was 10 years ago. And then you had, at the same time, the US Department of Education did a meta-analysis and a review of online learning studies. So they were really concerned, does this work for kids? What's the impact we're going to see in education? And you know what they found? They found that technology is holding students back, which is, again, a paradox, right? So how can that be true if, we were looking for technology to bring about this incredible revolution in education? How can that be happening? Well, one of the problems is motivation. And here, if Kevin had been asked to combine 8 and 3 by a teacher rather than an iPad, there's a greater chance he would have been interested in trying to do it. And it's different when you're learning from a person and you have a relationship with that person. Daniel Willingham, a cognitive psychologist, says that makes you care a little bit more about what they think, and it makes you a little bit more willing to put forth effort, right? There's another review by MIT with 126 studies saying that online courses are developing a growing presence in education, but the limited experimental evidence suggests that online-only courses lower student academic achievement compared to in-person courses. So in 4 of 6 studies that directly compare the impact of taking a course online versus in-person only, student performance was lower in the online courses. However, students performed similarly in courses with both in-person and online components compared to traditional face-to-face classes. So what does that tell us, right? That's where my big concern came from. So I think we realize now that for very large classes, very large groups of very young learners and young learners, only online courses, online only courses, they don't work as well as we had expected. So a lot of people thought this was going to be a technological revolution, but it's not really, nothing has really changed. We haven't really, achieved much better results. especially for very young learners and young learners. For older teens, it could work better, sure. We even have evidence in that sense. But that led me to write a couple of things for my blog. Actually, I wrote about COVID-19 and the ecosystem involving families and stakeholders in education and kids' emotional intelligence for my blog, because I expanded on 2 texts I had written in Portuguese for Edify's blog, Connected blog, O papel da família e sua relação com a escola no ensino remoto, right? So because something was bothering me, and I wrote that in June. And before that, which is connected as well, I wrote Como trabalhar a inteligência emocional nas crianças. So that was March 24th, because what I saw, and I think a lot of people here working as school managers, coordinators, mentors, they saw basically the same thing. It was that there was a lack of understanding within this ecosystem. You had parents with specific demands, you had school managers with other demands, you had teachers with some demands, and you had students with other demands, and it became chaos, And then I was thinking, how is that going to affect the neuropsychology of everybody involved, the stakeholders of education, teachers, school managers, us, educators, mentors, families, kids especially, right? How is that going to affect them? And then a couple of months ago, I was invited to deliver a talk on mental health for the Moscow English Language Teaching Association in Russia, right? And then I started doing some research about what is really affecting us as, professionals, especially educational professionals. And I came up with some terms you might have heard: toxic positivity. So the school ecosystem kind of forces us to believe that everything is going to be okay, that we can manage, that we, forget about what you're feeling, just go there and teach. But that creates an enormous problem. And I don't think we can see the immediate consequences now as what is going to happen in the near future, in terms of really mental health. Closure. It feels like a lot of people who have lost, family members and friends because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So they couldn't really be there, physically or even mentally, because something happened to them, because we were not addressing their emotions, right? The need for connection, human connection, and real physical connection was kind of lost. So how do we cope? We cope with that, right? And also validation, like openly talking about your feelings and emotions and not being judged and not being told that you shouldn't feel like that or you have to be like this. And also professional help. And this is the big elephant in the room, right? So the big elephant in the room, and the elephant that I have here is Mr. Trunk. For those of you who don't know who Mr. Trunk is, just check out Mr. Trunk Travels. And I talk about what happened to me when I had an anxiety attack a couple of years ago, because we were traveling back from Barcelona, I was going to Bristol. My wife was going to come to Brazil. And then it started, it got me thinking about a couple of things like burnout, for example, or, how we are exhausted mentally and physically. And we just have to keep going, right? This is how society is, the system is like that. Just keep going, keep going. But then those things, they have consequences. They have neuropsychological consequences. And a major shift happened in education last year, right? A major, major shift, because now students, they were supposed to be keep, education. Somehow we had to keep their classes going, the wheels turning, and those things, they are going to impact our students' psychological, mental health, right? Neurological health. So then I was thinking, is there anything that I can use to explain what's going on or to understand what's going on? And then, yes. And then like I said, I went back to my classes, at the University of Bristol. I had a unit called social psychology, and I studied this guy, Uri Bronfenbrenner. And he is the author who created what we know as the ecological systems theory. And then we are always thinking, or we're mostly thinking at, the individual level. We're thinking about, students and how much content they are supposed to learn in that lesson, right? Because we have a lesson plan, and the lesson plan can be flexible, but at the end of the day, we have to cover vocabulary and grammar structures, chunks and skills and things like that. So we kind of have a checklist of things we were able to deliver and things that we were not, right? So we're thinking about that. We're fixated, we're obsessed with that. And I understand, because, there's a curriculum, there's a scope and sequence, and then they're going to have a test and everything. So we're kind of focused on the individual level, how much our students can produce or something like that. But then if you think about Bronfenbrenner's, he has a very difficult name to pronounce, Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, there are other circles, there are other layers that we have to think of. And he calls the first layer, above the individual level, the microsystem, that has, the home, the peers, the school, the religion, neighborhood, immediate family. So those elements that are in the immediate surroundings of our students, right? And those were directly affected by the pandemic, right? Because now they have to stay at home at all times, They have lost contact with their peers. They are not going to school anymore. Depending on their religious beliefs or other beliefs, they might not do certain things, or maybe they want to do other things, right? And then even where they are growing up, their neighborhood, the things that they have there, connection issues, for example, here in Brazil and many other places, immediate family, people who have died because of coronavirus, right? For example, or living with their family 24/7 now because they're all trapped sort of in their homes. But then you have what Bronfenbrenner calls the mesosystem, which is the system of connections. So the system that connects the microsystem, the immediate surroundings of the individual, with the exosystem. So the exosystem is about those elements that are sort of outside the realm of influence of the kid, or our students, but they still have an impact. So, for example, parents' workplace, a lot of parents lost their jobs during the pandemic. Or some parents, they were forced to work more. So how can they assist very young learners when the time comes for them to, do their lessons? So how can a 4-year-old kid be self-regulated enough to turn on and off the computer and access Zoom or Google Meet and do everything they're expected to do if both parents are working harder than before and they're not there to assist them, right? What about mass media? Every day you turn on the TV, they're talking about how many people have died due to the pandemic. This is very scary to everyone, especially kids, right? Think about family friends. Maybe their parents have lost someone dear to them, and that has an impact on everything else. Maybe they're going to lash out, for example, because they're experiencing an emotional response that they cannot control or regulate very well. And that might have an impact on the teacher's job, for example. Think about the school system. A lot of schools dealing with educação infantil, kindergarten, for example, they had to close their doors because, it's not mandatory for their parents to enroll kids here, depending on their age. So they had to take their kids out of school because they lost their jobs. And then schools, they didn't get paid, so they had to close their doors. So there are many things we have to consider. And also, we have another system, another layer that is called the macro system. And this is culture. And we can see, especially here in Brazil, how many people, they don't really seem to care about what's going on, right? They're supposed to be socially isolated or distancing, but they're not. Or some people don't even believe the vaccine works. And those things, they have consequences because you know what? Those people are going to influence all the levels, way down to the individual level, and maybe they're going to force their kids to go to school, physically to be there. And maybe, you know what, maybe they should be there physically, because those are a lot of, I'd say they're very controversial questions that we don't really have the answers for right now. We're just doing the best we can, right? So some kids who have been at home, but nobody can help them, if they go to school, they can get help from the teachers, but then they run the risk of getting infected. So it's chaos, really. And then that brought me to, since we're thinking about the ecological systems theory, what are some of the takeaways from what's happening now? So one of the things that really came to me is that we need human connection, especially for very young learners and young learners, because they learn by observing others, and they learn by being physically there, somebody motivating them. And this is very important, and we lost that for the better part of 2020. And now we're kind of getting back to normal, the new normal, because there's a set of neurons in your brains that we call the mirror neuron system, which we can find in the parietal lobe, that is responsible for movement and, sensations, feelings, and things like that. So if you think about it, kids, they learn by observing others, by being, encouraged by others. And they cannot really, very young kids, very young learners, they cannot really do that through a screen of a computer. They have to have somebody there with them, right? So that was kind of lost. I think the sense of community was a little lost as well, because now, we have a lot of different stakeholders of education making their demands, no, it has to be like that. It has to be like that. And then they're not really communicating. They're not being empathetic. They don't have patience. And that impacts what teachers are delivering in terms of lesson plans, and what their kids are experiencing in their classes. We also have to understand that kids, they have a problem with self-regulation, because this is a natural psychological, development and neurological development of kids. We can self-regulate better, much better. We can tell ourselves, I have to do that. We can prioritize things. Kids cannot do that. So how do you keep them entertained? Because that's what we have to do now for them to want to go to classes, to stay there, to open their cameras. We have to help them with co-regulation. When we are there with them, we can co-regulate. We can help them sort of control themselves better. And that, I think the biggest takeaway is that, technology is only good if it allows for flexible learning environments, right? So this is something that we have to think of. This is something we have to reflect on. So if you think about flexible learning environments, I think there should be, an enormous amount of places, locations, or online spaces for kids to go so that they can learn in kind of, following their own pace, but, with a guide on the side. That's the teacher, that's the school. I like very much to think of constructivist schools here, like Montessorian schools, Reggio schools, for example, because they have done that. They actually did that 100 years ago. And that was truly revolutionary, I think. But we're still, you see what is happening? Even though we have more technology, we're kind of doing the same things that academia, professors were doing at the beginning of the last century. So those are some of the takeaways. Now let's think about neuropsychology, really in its own right, I think. So what does it mean? So neuropsychology is a science that studies what goes on in the brain and the mind, right? So we look at some of the psychological traits or features of the mind, and then we look at the brain structure and the brain function and what is happening inside our brains. So what do you see in this picture here? What is happening inside kids' brains nowadays? What is happening inside our brains, as teachers, educators, mentors, school managers? So what comes to your mind? Yeah. Yes, the year is 2020. I'm not sure what you're talking about there in the comment section. But yeah, yes, out of control, lots of thinking, lots of connections. Yeah. Overload. Yes, overload, concern, confusion. A lot of great work. Kayla is here. Hello, Kayla. Great to see you. Overwhelmed. They're feeling lost, stressed out. Yes, those are excellent words, right? And that is true. That's exactly what's going on inside their heads. That's exactly what's going on inside our heads, inside everyone's heads, right? Because if you think about learning, and this is what we have to wrap our minds around this once and for all. Learning is complex. Learning happens at different levels. Learning is cognitive and emotional. It's what happens inside our heads. But learning is also behavioral. It's what happens around our body, how we act things out in the environment we are. But it's also relational. It's how we connect with other people in the environment, but not just people, things, the environment really. So if we focus only on the cognitive aspect of learning as we have been doing for more than 100 years, so forget your emotions, just focus here, pay attention. Attention is a cognitive process. Memory is a cognitive process. You cannot really separate those things. You can separate body, mind, and brain, So we have to learn that once and for all. We have to understand that learning takes place at different levels. And then I have a question that has everything to do with neuropsychology. Do you think that beliefs and attitudes, the way students feel about things, the things they believe in, do you think that they affect, how much they can learn? What are some of those beliefs and attitudes you can think of? So let me take a look at the chat box. Yeah. Yeah, somebody said that the challenge in education was not in 2020, that we're going to witness. It's Thiago. Hello, Thiago. Yes. We're going to see a lot of other things taking place in this year, right? Yes, Rachel, hello. Fixed mindset, definitely. Yeah, for sure. So everybody agrees that beliefs and attitudes, they affect our students. And fixed mindset, anything else you can, I can't do that, Kayla said. When you believe that you can't do something. Yeah, insecurity, students who feel that they're not able to perform, most definitely. So those, they have an impact. And then think about 2020 and think about how overwhelming everything was. And then they have to perform and they have to do things. And now there's an added layer of complication, of complexity. The fear of death, that's very important. And we don't talk about it so much, right? So, and then students, they didn't perform as well as they, normally did, even though, it was based on this kind of old, outdated structure. But now, suddenly, overnight, they had to do other things. And then many of them may have felt like, I cannot do this. This is too much. This is overwhelming. That's going to have an impact on their psychological and neurological features, And then if you think about it, there is something that, Wikipedia is definitely not the best source of information, but they did do this, and I think it looks beautiful. There's something that psychology knows as cognitive bias, right? Some of the beliefs that we have that are not actually or factually true, they cannot be tested objectively as truth. So we have a bunch of beliefs such as, the vaccine doesn't work because I got a bunch of WhatsApp messages, by whoever, somebody who's very famous, or my family, or, and then one of those biases is confirmation bias, right? We just look for evidence that supports the things we believe in. So we have a bunch of them. According to this cognitive bias codex, we have nearly 200 biases, right? So the brain and the mind, they have a tendency to believe in things that are not true, and those will have an impact on how much we can learn, for example, right? So have we discussed those things in 2020? Do we, even now, right? Are we talking about those things with our students? Are we trying to maybe find the light at the end of the tunnel? Also, if you think about, let me go back here. If you think about other factors affecting learning at a different level, you can say, according to neuropsychologist, neuroscientist Antonio Damasio from Portugal, that you cannot really separate the connection between body, mind, and brain, like I said. So what you're feeling, in your environment, the stimuli you're, let's say, processing through your body, connections with, the people you have there, the environment, everything, those are going to become the substrate. They're going to become input, right, for your mind and brain to create reality for you. And the opposite is also true. If you think something is true, that's going to affect your body. You can feel physical pain. Social pain is related to physical pain as well. We also know from Stanislas Dehaene, a French neuroscientist, that there are 4 pillars of learning. We need to have attention, right? We need to be engaged. We also need to have error feedback as we go, and we need to be able to consolidate those things into the brain's cortex, this pink part of the brain. And that those things are affected by nature. So that's genetics, and also nurture, your environment, your upbringing. So 2020 has completely shifted that in a way that we were not expecting. So those things will have consequences. We also know that Maslow, you remember Abraham Maslow with his hierarchy of needs, right? The pyramid. Nowadays, there has been a change, I'd say, to his pyramid, because we can tell from neuroimaging studies that social needs should come before physical needs, especially for mammals. And we are mammals, right? We're primates. So because we are born helpless, and we are helpless for many years of our lives, we are very small kids. We cannot do much, right? We need our parents, our caregivers to do everything for us. So this bond with a human being who's going to take care of us, who's going to nurture us, is more important than the physical need. Because if we don't have a caregiver, a human, then we don't have our physical needs met, right? And we can see in brain scans that not having that bond, or feeling that you are rejected by a human being, causes social pain in the brain. And social pain activates the same areas of the brain when you experience physical pain. So we took that away from kids. What are the consequences? What are the long-term consequences of that, right? We also know now, from a more neurological perspective, that kids who go through what Natasha Kazanov, a neuroscientist, calls adverse childhood experiences, they are going to have lasting consequences in their adult lives. That means that they are not going to find a proper job. They're going to have some sort of academic disadvantage. They might even die earlier. So this study here is one of the biggest studies conducted so far. Almost 18,000 people involved between 1995 and 1997. So they looked at children who had gone through trauma or traumatizing experiences, and then they followed them. So it was a longitudinal study. And then they realized that those kids, they were more likely to have a more chaotic life because they were not able to recover, because that's the time of our lives that our brains are very plastic. We're making a lot of very important fundamental connections for the future. And then if we don't have this bond with human beings, with caregivers, with our teachers, with everyone, then we're going to suffer the consequences in the future. We're not going to have positive relationships. And you know what? Everything depends on positive relationships, right? So what does that make you feel? Now, how do you feel, right? So think about everything that's going on now with our kids because of the pandemic. Think about everything that's going on because they have lost someone in their family or because their parents have lost their jobs, you know. So we can't really think of solutions if we don't look at the bigger picture, I think. So like I said, this is the pyramid. You see that people or kids, very young learners who go through traumatizing events, there's a series of, it's kind of like a domino effect of things that are going to happen to them that are going to affect everything, their social conditions. They're going to disrupt neural development. They're going to have an impact on social emotional skills, cognitive impairment. And because of that, they're going to be less able to control themselves, to self-regulate their executive functions. They are responsible for controlling, updating, inhibiting behavior. They're not going to be at their best, which means that they're more prone to disease, disability, social problems, and early death. And I don't want to be alarming here, but we have to think of those things, because even though the pandemic is a terrible, terrible thing, it gave us, I don't want to say the opportunity, because it's not really an opportunity. It's a terrible thing, but it gave us the possibility to reflect on the things we're doing and what we want education to be from now on, right? So what do we do then? And I have a couple of minutes, and maybe we can take a few questions. Well, the best thing we can do really is to integrate the different stakeholders of our ecosystem, right? Of our ecological systems theory, like Bronfenbrenner used to say, right? We need families and schools and kids, and us, educators, teachers, to be on the same page. And that will not happen as long as parents, they think they can have a big say in what happens in the classroom, because you know what? They know better. And that happens all the time. They will interfere with what you, teacher, what you are doing in the classroom, because, that's not how I learned. Well, maybe you didn't learn the best way. And we study, we have the pedagogical background. We know, at least, most of us, hopefully. So we have to better prepare teachers as well, so that they have the foundational skills to do their job well. But we also have to talk to school managers so that they can address the mental health problems, so that they can value their teachers, and then that we have a positive, welcoming environment, atmosphere at the school. We also have to tell kids that, they can't have their way all the time. It's not just about having fun. Learning is about being serious and making an effort. Learning is about, it's about desirable difficulties, Robert Bjork would call them. So this has to be in the minds of every stakeholder in the school ecosystem, because this is how the brain works. This is how the mind works. And then again, we have to remember that beliefs and attitudes, they impact whatever we're doing, not just the ones we have, but what families have, because they will demand, right? They will say, schools, they have to do it like this. And then what can you tell them? So we have to understand how learning takes place. We have to understand the different levels of analysis for learning. And we have to make sure that everybody in the school ecosystem is on the same page. And you know what? What is the objective that we have? What is the end goal of education? We want those kids there to have an opportunity, right? We want those kids there to learn and to find what makes them happy. That's what we want, So if we don't have this end goal in mind, it's very easy to lose track of what we're doing, because then we fall back on whatever we've been doing for 100 years, which is content, right? Forget about the cognitive aspect of teaching, because that's just one part. We have the emotional aspect, the behavioral aspect, the relational aspect. It's much bigger than that. So what to do then? I think this could be cliche. Maybe that's something that you've seen over and over, but I cannot stress enough that we need to have empathy. We have to be able to put ourselves in the shoes of others, So in families, they had the opportunity to do that. And I really hope that they did that they saw for the very first time how hard it is to be a teacher, to teach a bunch of kids, 20 kids, 30 kids in a classroom. It's hard. It's one of the hardest jobs in the world, But we also have to understand that parents, as teachers, they have a lot of work to do that they might not be able to help their kids. So we can talk. So we have to reestablish the sense of community. We have to have patience with one another and collaborate. And I think love is something we take for granted, right? So if you think about, I think we have some Greek people here in the audience, right? You think about love, in ancient Greece, you had different words to talk about love. And I think that if you think about love for one another as brotherly or fraternal love, not just romantic love, for example, for the community, that's exactly what we want to see in education, caring and kindness, so that we can do our job together. And remember, the end goal is for kids to feel better, to be able to test things, to experiment and find what makes them happy. And so I think the message is that, true innovation would be focusing on an integrated solution with the school at the heart of the process. Because if schools are there to educate kids, they are also there to educate parents and families, right? And I think that we have to bring parents and families to the school, and we have to, I don't know, maybe set up a list of workshops, events, and we can have conversations like this about mental health, about how we learn, about methodology, so that families can understand what it is that they should expect, and especially what they should not expect, what they cannot demand, because you know what? It doesn't work. It's outdated. And I think if you can hear a cat meowing, I think he wants to be part of the lecture, okay? So it has to be, the school has to be the heart of the process. And then, of course, if we have all of those things in mind, I believe that Matthew has the answer for us. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to read. Yeah, I really like this quote. I think I saw it on Facebook a couple of months ago. Henry Correa, you probably know who he is. He's involved with Brastiso, and he posted it. I said, thank you, Henrik. This is exactly what I needed. And I think that learning is it's much more about asking questions and kind of reflecting on the things that we're doing, and not really just taking things for granted and never changing them, because this is what we've been doing for a long time, And I'm a huge fan of the Mandalorian series nowadays, Star Wars. And my wife gave me an awesome T-shirt with Grogu, Baby Yoda, for those of you who are not familiar. And one of the motto of the Mandalorians is, "This is the way. This is the way," So they cannot remove their helmet because this is the way. I think that's a stupid way. That's a way that doesn't work very well. I think we have to question things. And you know what? It's time we started questioning the things we do in education, because if we do not have an integrated solution, if we do not involve families and all stakeholders in the school ecosystem, and if we do not base our decisions, our propositions on how the brain works, on how the mind works, then we're not really doing anything innovative. We're just integrating new tools, new toys, and doing the same old things, right? So thank you very much, everyone. I hope this was useful. Of course, I'm going to ask Barbara or Rafael to share a blog post that I prepared for you, and then I discussed some of those ideas. And I also uploaded the PDF of my presentation if you want to go through a couple of things. You can also find some of the references I use there in my text. And hopefully it was something that made you reflect and, I don't know, maybe change something, whatever is within your power. All right, everyone. So thank you again. I'm here if you have questions. I don't think we have a lot of time, but you know where to find me. Go to my blog, send me an email, follow me on social media.
Thanks a lot, Andre. Thanks a lot, everybody who joined us. Just remembering, the link for your downloading your certificates is available. The data error is already fixed. All right, so everybody can download your certificates as well, following the instructions on the video description. And I want to say, everybody, I want to ask everybody sorry because our next presenter, Rita Ladeia, had a family problem and she won't be able to join us right now, okay? But we are going to go live on her room as well, her lecture, so I can explain it better to you what happened and invite you guys to work on our. Oh, vai fazer? Oh my god. Oh, I was just informed that Rita Ladeia will show up. Thanks a lot. I'm sorry for the misunderstanding. And so, see you at 11 a.m. on Educação Bilíngue na Infância, explorando oportunidades de aprendizagens por caminhos digitais. The lecture will be in Portuguese, okay? Thanks a lot, everybody, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.